I've identified you as the lovely Adrian Tomlinson, who's joining us for the staff story. So a very warm welcome to you, Adrian, and it's lovely to have you around the table this morning. And also we've got Kevin Sargent on the call this morning. So Kevin is going to be standing in as the medical director, while Hal stands in as the chief executive, which brings me to the fact that it is, of course, Angie's last board meeting with us as chief exec at Chesterfield. We're going to have a very suitable and fulsome celebration to say a thank you to Angie for all she's achieved during her time with us. But like to record our thanks to her today and our appreciation of all that she's done. We're also going to have a paper on the agenda later about provider collaboratives, and I think it's very fitting that we're having it on the day of Angie's last board meeting, because Angie will leave us many legacies, but one that will be particularly outstanding is the leadership she's shown of working across the system. Chesterfield has been acknowledged, I think, by all the other providers around us as really having stepped up and forward. And I know I've said to Angie on a number of occasions, I'm a bit confused, Angie, about who it is you're speaking about, because her vocabulary has been so completely at one. She has seen herself as much as a system leader as the leader of the part of the system, Chesterfield Royal Hospital, and the enthusiasm and the commitment and the authenticity with which you did that, Angie, has been infectious in the best possible way. So I'm really pleased that we'll be having that conversation today, and of course we will be building on the legacy in time to come. But we will have many more reflections across the breadth of your contribution and your legacy to us before we say our full and proper goodbye to you. But that's on account and to record our thanks in today's meeting. So I think they're probably the introductions. We don't have Jeremy with us today. Have we had apologies from Jeremy, John?
Yes, he sent through his apologies in a few weeks ago. So.
Very good. They escaped my attention, but we'll note Jeremy Wright's apologies. So I think without further ado, we will move along to the board story, and welcome again to Father Adrian. And I think Krishna is going to introduce the item.
Thank you, Helen. So Father Adrian, as you can see by his background there, is our team chaplain, but actually is here as to sort of talk about his story as a patient. I'm going to hand straight over to Father Adrian. He sent a synopsis through about his story, but I think it was really helpful to hear. I mean, I heard firsthand from Father Adrian when he came to see me about the care that he received and the different perspective of being on the other side. So I'll hand over to Father Adrian. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me with you this morning. As you've seen from my synopsis, my name is Father Adrian Tomlinson, and my first incarnation with the Chesterfield Royal Hospital was back in 2003 as the Roman Catholic chaplain, more recently as on-call chaplain from December 2020, and thus now part-time team chaplain from May 2021. I'm currently serving as the parish priest of the largest parish of the Diocese of Hallam that covers South Yorkshire and North East Derbyshire, comprising 3 churches, Catholic high school and 2 primary schools. And I am also the area dean for the southern portion of the diocese of the area of Bassetlaw and Chesterfield, with pastoral responsibility for the clergy in this area. My initial career was in banking from 1988 before entering priest training seminary in Rome in 1995. My role in the hospital supports all faiths and none, providing spiritual, pastoral and emotional support to staff and patients. I'm also on call throughout the week, responding to out-of-hours requests and supporting, including last rites. I want to share with you now my experience of being on the receiving end of our medical care here at the CRH. I was admitted through ED on the evening of Saturday, October the 2nd, in a great deal of pain, and subsequently was diagnosed with an extremely large kidney stone. I was discharged overnight for my own comfort with a good deal of pain relief and told to report back to SAU on Sunday morning at 8:30. Within 30 minutes of arriving at SAU, I had been seen by a consultant, assessed, and I was transferred to Staveley ward to await emergency intervention. Due to high theatre demand, surgery was delayed, in fact, until the Tuesday morning, rather shockingly to me, before I'd had a shower. I think after talking with Krishna and with Sarah Ward, I think the best summation of my experience was the letter that I managed to write a week after my discharge. And if you bear with me, I'd just like to read you that letter. To my dearest colleagues, I am proud to be able to call you colleagues. I was proud, to be able to call you colleagues before. Your care, compassion, and constant ability to go above and beyond always left me in awe. But then I became your patient. Words are insufficient to express my profound thankfulness for your care and concern for me. And yet I must try. I have been able to share with so many people how I was made to feel like the Pope himself. You are, all of you, nothing short of awesome. You made me feel cared for, loved, and safe in what was, for the first time in my life, being an inpatient in a hospital. Even the day I was discharged, and I know this is weird, I was torn about going home, as I just felt so utterly safe and cared for, like I was with my own family. I am now left with one dilemma. How do I ever look at you without getting emotional? You are all angels, and believe you, I can say that with authority. You have humbled me, and I am so honored to be able to work alongside such incredible human beings. Thank you is a very small word, but I say it with meaning beyond words. You are simply the best. I ended that with Father Adrian, your troublesome brother, friend, and colleague. And I'm told that you want to know what the areas that I think the hospital could improve. Well, I think the quality of the tea bags leaves something to be desired. Thank you.
That's been a splendid walkthrough of your experience for us. Thank you so much, Father Adrian. I have to admit, though, your reference to being looked after as if you were the Pope has made me wonder if we've got a flotilla of nuns attending to the clergy every time they arrive in the trust.
No, they're absolutely superb. I couldn't. There aren't words. There are not words.
Well, the genuineness of your sentiment certainly got betrayed in those words. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Krishna.
Would it be possible to just bring Sarah in, really, because she's been instrumental in supporting sort of the chaplaincy about sort of the impact of sort of the additional investments? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be Father Adrian for a moment. I just wanted to add what Father Adrian used the word humble in that, and I think he is incredibly humble in the service that he's offered and delivered to the trust. You'll remember that we were running with our head of pastoral care, Reverend Martin, and volunteer chaplaincy at the beginning of COVID with some inherent issues, our volunteer chaplains weren't able to come in, and our on-call was very sporadic. We thankfully had support to extend to an on-call service, and then latterly to Father Adrian's part-time post. And without that investment, we certainly could not deliver the service that we do. And whilst he is here a couple of days a week, I think his presence is felt throughout the week, as is Martin's. So I just want to endorse the service that they deliver, the impact that it has not only on our staff, but on our not only on our patients, but on our staff as well. What the unseen work that goes on in terms of support and health and well-being that is delivered through these two guys is just simply incredible. They're running staff clinics. This is all in the background that quite rightfully we are not cited on because it is confidential and private. But I know from first-hand feedback that it is without doubt immeasurable.
And here to that, Sarah. So I think we need to extend our thanks to Father Adrian for not only sharing his experiences with us as a patient, but for all he does every day. And I think your reflection of the fact that his presence is felt even when his presence is not on site is so accurate and so revealing. Sue.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Father Tomlinson. It was lovely. What a great way to start our meeting. I think I just wanted to reflect really that obviously when we're at board, we talk about the services and our staff and our measures and so on. And I think what the benefit of having these stories at board is for board members who are not living and breathing that all day, every day, is a really, really helpful reminder of actually what this is all about. And I think we're all vulnerable, aren't we? Or rather, I feel like I'm completely indestructible. But when you're ill and you really then feel vulnerable and you need the care, it's lovely to hear that what we get in the Chesterfield is that complete and utter care when you need it the most. And that's what this is all about. And it is the point of having these stories at board. But I just want to say how it's great to hear it, but it's also very reassuring because as a board, we do need to hear the real life stories to make sure that what we believe we are presiding over is really happening. So it's lovely to hear that. So thank you for sharing it. And I'm not sure whether anybody's sorting out the tea bags, but I shall bring some Yorkshire tea next time I come to the Trust. Thank you.
I think you might be surprised at how much will be required to industrial quantities, I imagine, are consumed in the average day. Well, let us record our thanks to Father Adrian and to Sarah for her leadership of the chaplaincy function. And of course, to remember the Reverend Martin Jinks in our thanks and appreciation today for leading the chaplaincy team. But a super start to the meeting in terms of what we've heard, and also in terms of Sue having put it in a helpful context for us there about the importance of having, the daily life of the hospital brought into colour and stark relief as it just has been. So thank you. I'm going to move on to item 3, which is the Chief Exec's report, please, Angie.
Thanks, Helen. And I always say really difficult act to follow, the patient stories, and today's no different, but I'll do my best. And I just wanted to draw out from my report our thoughts with our Ukrainian colleagues, family, friends at the moment, and all those affected by the events. Just to confirm that we have provided the support, as I know some of you asked, to colleagues. We have returned a nil return to NHS England as required of all organisations yesterday around supplies from Russia and Belarus. And a big thank you to all our staff who, as you'd expect in true Team CRH style, have offered to send all sorts of expired supplies and help and support out to Ukraine. So thank you to everyone for that. The other two areas I just wanted to pull out was given the pandemic is still impacting on us. I'm pleased to say the number of inpatients reduces by the day, but the challenge of managing everything else that's going on in the NHS world has meant a delay to some of the planning
round this year and to the preparation of our annual report. So we're asking for board to delegate approval to Audit and Risk Committee for our annual reports. Everyone, as always, I say as always, particularly last year when we did this as well, everyone has sight of the audits and the opportunity to comment, but it's just that formal delegation that we need board approval for today. And the second area you'll have noted was around RPC and the SOP, an update to the CQC as we take on another practice that we need board approval for. And we're also using the opportunity to update our registration with the CQC and let them know from the 1st of April that Hal will be accountable officer. So those two items formally need minuting and support. Please, Helen, happy to discuss, and any other comments gratefully received on my report.
Thank you very much, Angie. Can I ask that we attend to the two matters first that Angie specifically asked for approvals about? So if anybody's any questions or comments regarding the request for those approvals, let us deal with those, and then we'll go to any other questions people might have on other elements of the report. So any hands on the items for approval? No, I think we can consider both those items approved. Thank you very much. So any other questions about other elements of the report? Jane.
Two relatively minor matters associated with the report, more than specifically on the report, if I may, Helen. One was related to thinking about the charity and thinking about our role around health and well-being. And I know there's a national drive looking at nighttime food availability for staff, and I wondered if we might outline either what we're thinking about doing about that, what we're currently doing about that, or whether we actually need to develop a plan for that, because I think that's really important, and it's obviously gathering momentum nationally. And then the second thing was, which came from our discussions earlier in the week, really, was about my planned care. And really, if we have any thought about what the impact of that might be on Chesterfield, whether we might see specific patients looking to access our services through very specific specialities, or whether we might see an outflow of patients because we've got a particularly long waiting list. I wondered if we've given any thought to that. So what's the kind of the net impact on, and have we got identified any specific services around that? Thank you.
Those, Jane. We'll just go and see if there's anything else, and then we'll hand back to Angie. Anybody else want to come in on the report? No. Hand back to you, Angie, if we may, please.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Jane. And other exec colleagues may want to come in, but certainly the nighttime food discussion, you won't be surprised to know, has done the rounds a few times, and we never quite get it right. And I always fondly remember 2 o'clock in the morning on a night shift, loving having chips, which we'll never go back to, I'm sure, that level of catering again. But certainly some of the offers that we've done, I know John was involved in the Listening to Action piece of work where we looked at the facilities for delivering hot food at night for staff. So happy to provide a bit more of an update, and you're right, something we need to keep continuing to discuss. And John, do you want to give any update before I move on to my planned care?
Yeah, so thanks for raising. So the Trust uses hot and cold vending machines now near what's affectionately known as the Goldfish Bowl area of the organisation, which is no central point where we can put those devices because they're very large and bulky. More than happy to look at that and see if there are any ongoing issues with that. I didn't know that there was a particular problem. I know we have had problems during COVID about having to get them filled and keeping them up to date with a wide selection of food, ranging from the comfort food of chips to more healthy options. So we're trying to have a smorgasbord of offers there. But I'm more than happy to pick up any finer details to make that more effective. Hopefully in times to come, once we've finished moving the estate around, it will be in close proximity to where people do take rest breaks, although I do accept that there is not a proximity to some areas of the organisation. So I'm happy to take that offline and see if we can expand the offer. That's absolutely not a problem. Thank you.
I wonder if we could just ask John to pencil in, not John Thorpe, to pencil in a discussion, perhaps an informal session for the board around this issue I mean, I've listened to this explanation for a long time, and as Angie says, we're probably never going back to chips at 2 a.m. But I suppose I wonder why we're not going back to something a bit healthy and tasty and nice at 2 a.m. And I know there's loads of constraints about, you know, resources and all the rest of it, but we have a workforce that works 24/7, 365 days a year. And we wouldn't expect people not to eat if they were working during the day. So I don't know why we should expect them not to eat because they're working during the night. Now, I'm sure, you know, there's loads of constraints and barriers to getting, you know, the ideal solution. But if you could just mark in for us, John, the opportunity, please, for us to have another cant around this, I think that will be really good. Back to you, Angie, for My Plan Care, please.
Thanks, Helen. And just for the minutes, I did used to have veg and protein with my chips at 2 in the morning. On my planned care, lots of opportunities, Jane, and you'll know from some of the work we've been doing in Derbyshire that I smiled yesterday in Secretary of State's speech that it seems a bit of a revelation that we're going to offer patients choice to travel elsewhere for their elective surgery. We've been doing that for a long time. We've continued to do it throughout the pandemic, and particularly now with those long waits that none of us want. All our patients in Derbyshire over 78 weeks have been contacted to offer that very option of moving should they wish. We are fortunate in Chesterfield that very few of our specialties have those long waits, but where we do, we're working both within Derbyshire and with our South Yorkshire colleagues to look at how we can make sure we keep that offer live. And for me, do more of the transformation work together with other providers so that patients, if you think of our ophthalmology patients, much more choice about where they get their Optom services now than they did even a year ago. Lots of really good work in that field. So yes, we will continue to offer, whether that's independent sector or other providers, and be a recipient of patients from other areas where we can. But for me, the important bit around making sure we're offering that transformation of service and the help and support to patients who are on waiting lists to do the right thing and not eat chips at 2 in the morning, and keep their exercise up and get the support from a mental health perspective, that when you're waiting a long time for a procedure that sometimes may seem very minor to us looking at it, the impact that it has on your quality of life can be hugely significant. So lots of work happening, not got it all perfect, but we'll definitely keep that focus, and My Plan Care just reinforces for me what we've been doing.
Thank you very much. Berenice.
Sorry, just to add to that, and in support of kind of Jane's question as well, once the information, because we're on a journey, aren't we, about populating these systems go live. We were quite well prepared in Chesterfield because we were one of the early implementers for this system, but the detail is going on over a number of weeks, and what it does now give is the patients that opportunity to actually look at the information in a bit more detail. So I think you're right. Once this is really bedded in, there will be obviously the opportunity to really understand some of the weights and what is available across different systems, and there may be some additional choice that Angie's just described as well. So, but we've got a bit more work to do on that information to make sure that it is validated and correct.
Do you want to add to this, Lee?
I think, Helen, Jane, one of the conversations we were having at the surgical assurance meeting around the impact of choice probably isn't the impact that you're describing about us offering our patients choice, but the consequential impact potentially of neighbouring trusts offering their patients choice and us importing them, given the political imperatives around 104-week and 52-week waits, which are being somewhat managed in deliverology style on a bad day, perhaps by our NHS England and broader colleagues. There is a kind of zero-sum game to some of this about how we make commitments about how fast we can clear that long waiting backlog and the consequential impact of choice inflowing. And I think there's a big piece of thinking we need to do about how do we review from a health inequalities perspective the nature of those long waiters and the comparative importance of the services we offer that aren't candidly accessed inverse care law wise quite as rapidly as some of those. So we've started to get into that conversation, but it's not fully baked, Jane.
Thank you all. Further helpful insight about how we're managing the pressure on the system at the moment. I'm going to move on, Angie. Thank you for your report, and you're going to take us now, if you would please, to the Shadow Provider Leadership Board proposals.
Thank you. And after your huge build-up earlier, Helen, I shall do my best to do this justice, but I know you will support me with this, having very ably chaired the Task and Finish group that's got us to where the Provider Collaborative Leadership Board in its shadow form currently is. The first thing I'd say is, I know a lot of you have said is, have heard me say, is we are the system. So I still hear people thinking that the system is something over there. It's not. We are it. We provide care for Derby and Derbyshire residents. We employ Derby and Derbyshire people. To me, that is very simplistic, perhaps, but that's what this is all about. There is an element of this that is, there's a large element of this that is NHS diktat. So we have all been told as part of integrated, we've all been advised as part of developing our integrated care systems that we need to have a provider collaborative. So some of the process that you see in the documentation and some of the governance work is a central return to say that we have got a provider collaborative. I think the real test for me is when you go out, as we've all commented and we've all heard this morning, and see and hear all our staff and our patients recognising the really good health and social care that they get. And my worry is that we over-governance something and make it too bureaucratic that gets in the way of our staff and patients delivering and receiving the best possible care. So the provider collaborative is an important but only one element of the governance structure that will ensure we do that. If you reflect back nationally, where some places don't work well as providers together, that's not my experience of working in Derbyshire. So having worked in a previous system where I use the example because there were 13 providers of care, we've got a smaller number, which means we work much closer together. And I think we've got a really good focus on health and care rather than, and we have our social care colleagues as part of the party with us, not just invited in, whereas this element of the Health and Social Care Act is purely NHS driven. And that's where I think there's a risk that we'll lose that really good work of integrated health and care. The integrated care partnership and the infrastructures that support that are the areas where formally we sit round the table with social care, which is why in the provider collab you don't see them in the documentation and there, but that doesn't mean to say that they aren't part of all the work that we do. So provider collab is NHS is bringing provider organisations together. And the other important bit that I keep having to remind myself is it's at scale. So we will continue to be a foundation trust who, and obviously I'm biased, but I think works really well with primary care colleagues, with our social care colleagues, with other trusts, not necessarily in our ICS, to deliver integrated care. Where the provider collab should, and it's down to us as leaders in the system, provide the difference is the at scale. So if we think, and the example, a couple of examples Helen and I heard and were talking about in our last discussion was corporate services. So, yes, we can deliver our own green plan or our own digital agenda, but think how powerful that is if we do that across Derbyshire and at scale across all NHS providers. So where there's opportunities that we can do that, we should use. And from a clinical service perspective, I think stroke's a really good one of where one organisation on its own can't get the support to do what it needs to do, but actually the power in working together across all providers with the ambulance service, with GP providers, with a network in and out of your own ICS should really drive through change much quicker. And the last comment I'd say is, I do worry that we're already losing the lessons learned that we said we wouldn't do at the beginning of the pandemic, about some of that, just getting on with it and really working together and pulling together to deliver change for the benefit of our population. And yes, we need governance and we need a safe assurance process around it, but it's a really fine balance, I think, between not making this too complex and too overgoverned. And Helen's advice is around committees in common and the structure and terms of reference around that. And we've listened and taken on board that, because this has to be governed well and has to lead well and get the assurance we need for our population. But at the same time, it has to be agile enough to deliver that real transformation to make a difference at prevention and provision level for our patients. So therein ends my little speech. I hope that's helpful. Helen, what have I missed?
Nothing. That was really splendid. Thank you very much, Angie. And I think, as you say, I think your opening remark about the fact that this is one element of a wider governance. So I'm sure, colleagues will have concerns about, ongoing working and indeed even further improvements to working with social care, but that is provided for elsewhere. This is about how we come together as NHS providers. I think it's seen very well, as well as the other colour and context. So thank you. Now, I anticipate lots of questions and thoughts, because most of you won't have spent quite as many hours on this as Angie and I have over the last, probably year, really. So feel free to raise them now, please. Nora.
Thank you, and thanks, Angie. You answered some questions there. Partly my concerns reflect some of the discussions that we had yesterday at the Council of Governors, with where decisions were being made about referrals and where care could be got from, which was specifically around Sheffield, not so much in Derbyshire, and how we then maintain those existing relationships and decisions which are sort of out with the 6 providers that are going to be within this particular collaborative. So we'd just like some insights into that, if possible. And then it really is just understanding the sort of timescales on this. At the same time as the leadership team within the trust are making strategic decisions around the way forward, then how is this going to tie in with the timing for some of those larger decisions that the shadow collaborative board is going to be making? So those were perhaps just 2 things to kick off with.
Very good. Just we'll ask you to hold on to those for a moment, Angie. Paul.
Thank you. Couple of questions. I appreciate that social care, Angie, are part of the ICP and the larger picture. However, some NHS decisions will have impact on social care, how providers work. And if you don't have those people at the table, not necessarily full members, but I know there are observers. So is there anything stopping observer status for social care to be able to inform some of the decisions that will take place, and has that been considered? The second issue is to do with on some of the assumptions within the paper. So if you look at delegated authority and urgent decisions within the paper, joined up care terms of reference, it talks about that already the seniority of individual members means that they are committing their respective organisations and making decisions within the scope of their own authority. What kind of decisions do you envisage could be taken with that delegated authority, and what terms of references are around which make sure that they are within normal scope within decisions? It says that urgent decisions may be taken by the board. Again, what governance arrangements are around that to ensure that they are not ultra vires, basically, is what I'm asking.
Thanks, Paul. Let's go to Lee.
I might build on Paul's bit. I think, Paul, the honest answer is, if we were really, really honest, we're kind of making this up as we go along. We've got a sort of system first sentiment around ICS planning in advance of the Health and Care Act, which doesn't quite encompass that with the right governance processes compared with what we had in the internal market. So we are dealing with a high level of ambiguity on all of these issues, one might claim, about what's ultra vires and what isn't at the moment. So I think that's a level of ambiguity that we just got to kind of navigate through. My broader point probably was about just exposing. We've probably made a sensible decision about the provider collaborative in Derbyshire being a sensible unit, which is equal to the Derbyshire hosted providers, and kind of cracking on with it, as opposed to carving it out into slightly more esoteric subsets, which I don't think is a bad thing. There are very specific requirements about that being NHS only, i.e. under the Health and Care Act, you will have a provider collaborative that is NHS parties only, but we do absolutely need to find mechanisms to make sure we've got the right engagement mechanisms for general practice and social care, but some of the design rules around this aren't quite within our gift. There's a kind of national legislative expectation about who's in the provider collaborative. Then we've got to find the right mechanisms to make sure that social care and general practice particularly can find their right voice through it, is the point I was minded to make. And thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Ian.
I guess it probably wouldn't surprise you that one of the questions I'm sort of asking is, so what's the risk of around the achievement of this, and what are the top three risks? But I guess I reflect, having been involved in I know it sounds a very small thing, the joint tender for audit across Derbyshire, and I reflect how long and how much time and effort that took to get everyone aligned to get to a joint tendering process, and how that almost soon after we'd achieved that, we had one or two entities, not necessarily the same group here, but within the overall system, and effectively opting out of that process. So I guess the challenge for me, and maybe it's what I perceive as the risk, is I've certainly heard Angie talk about speed and execution, some of the dynamism pre-COVID, and now what feels like a convergence, which might take a number of years, and therefore I'm trying to just assess how we perhaps can get to some better solutions more quickly. And is that around ultimately allocations of resources and money, because people tend to hold on to budgets and resources, whereas actually when you share them you can get there quicker. So it's a kind of a question around risk, but includes money and collaboration and convergence.
Very good. Are we all done? I think we are. Angie.
I'll attempt to answer and pick up Lee's point. So we're on a journey. It isn't perfect, and it won't be. And in true NHS and social care style, nothing ever fits perfectly into the boxes. We are still a foundation trust and will continue to be, and accountability sits with us. I'd challenge, it'll be Hal and other colleagues who will sit on the senior leadership team and work across Derbyshire. I know that none of us would make a decision that wasn't the right decision for our patients and our people, and how we feed that across between the senior leadership team into the provider collaborative that captures that risk around social care not being part of it, because they're at the senior leadership table, Paul, just to pick up your point. And I challenge the comment around health decisions, impact on social care decisions, back to my point around it's the person in the middle of this. So if we're all making the decision for the person, then it shouldn't, and there's always a risk, isn't there, because we're human beings, but it shouldn't unravel in the way that perhaps we've seen it previously. The money will be an interesting one, because increasingly they're talking about money coming into ICSs rather than organisations. So, but again, we still have our statutory responsibility as an FT to manage our own money. So that tension around how we do that, I think, is going to be a challenge. the time frame in, it was actually the beginning of COVID, not pre-COVID, because COVID gave us a bit of that freedom to act that none of us feel every day in a very bureaucratic, quite rightly, taxpayers responsible system, and how we use this as an opportunity to maybe get a bit more of that speed of decision making, and any emergency decision wouldn't be made by a provider collaborative, it would be made by the constituents supporting that decision. So as chair of the Planned Care Board for Derbyshire, if I wanted an urgent decision about how rapidly we could deliver something different across health and social care for those patients waiting 104 weeks, I would make that recommendation to the provider collab that would go through to the Integrated Care Board. But I wouldn't have done it without some of the discussions that we'd have, and I'd be doing it on behalf of us, representing our own patients and our own governors and constituents. So I wish I could answer those much more neatly, but I hope I've given some flavour around how I see it working.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Angie. You might just want to give Nora some comfort too, that it's not going to preclude relationships with other providers, which I think she raised.
Thank you about that last point. That and as I said to someone yesterday, our patients will continue to travel wherever, and particularly the discussion we had earlier. So a lot of our patients will still be treated in Sheffield, and around all our borders, patients will continue to move as they see best to get the care that they want. And the opportunity for provider collabs is that you work at scale. So if you think of the mental health work or the ambulance work, they don't just look within Derbyshire. They use the provider collab to look at how we can gain benefits from working with wider networks. And that's what we need to make sure we do as all providers.
Do you want to come back, Nora?
Yeah, just to flesh out on that, the other bit, and it goes to some of Lee's points, was around there was the feeling of although there was still going to be the connectivity, but that's what the governors wanted reassurance about. There was also a discussion around, but then how do you work out, where your budget sits? Because there was a feeling that, there was a retreat back into, kind of ring fencing budgets and silo working. So I'm just interested in how the, the collaborative board is going to address those kind of issues, because to me, it seems like we're going to be discussing, where are going to be the areas of joined up focus. But the discussions around finance, resources and budget seems to be rather disconnected from that. And actually, it does need to be thought of as part of the package rather than as, well, we'll work this bit out and then we'll go back and we'll go back and sort of divide up how we're going to do it. It's how do we just ensure that we don't create an environment where people are retrenching back into ring fencing and silo working.
Can I start, Helen, and then I know Lee's got his hand up.
Yeah, you start and I might follow you.
Sorry, go on, you start if you want.
Well, just to add some colour, if I may, to Angie's replies, and it goes to the heart of Ian's question: what's the risk? And if I was to be really brutal and candid, the risk is that this proposal actually doesn't go far enough, in my view. But it's as far as we can get it currently. Yeah. So, of course, we all want to empower our colleagues to work together with other colleagues in the best interest of patients. Yeah. But we are constrained in that ambition by virtue of the fact that we will continue to be accountable as foundation trusts. So this proposal has no proposal at this point in time for any prior delegations out of foundation trust boards into the provider collaborative. Now, personally, I don't think that's the way of the future, but it's the way of now. Yeah, but that doesn't detract from the fact that when our chief executives come together, they are doing very sensible things together on our behalf. But they are painfully aware, believe you me, they are painfully aware that their accountability continues to be to their own boards. And whilst managing that accountability to their own boards, they're going as far as they can and as quickly as they can in doing things together. And at the moment, we're all accountable for our own pots of money. There will be a bit of money flowing from the ICB potentially into the provider collaborative, yeah. But that in itself, I don't think, will obscure accountability, governance or decision making, as raised by both Nora and Paul, because again, I think chief executives will be very mindful that they have no formal delegations into that provider collaborative, and their accountabilities are back on their own boards. So the risk, Ian, is that I think we need to get greater levels of trust and greater clarity around the governance in such a way that it allows us to be clear and give clear delegations out of individual trusts into provider collaboratives, because I think it's only when we get to that point that we will be better able to make decisions where the patient is the winner, but there are organisations that may be losers in the overall settlement and preferred way forward. But this I would recommend to you as an important step in the right direction. Is there anything you want to add to that, Lee, or does that cover the ground?
Build slightly, Helen, and apologies. Just to Nora's point, in terms of experiential learning, we are currently doing financial planning system first. We are currently doing our transformation planning system first. As a consequence of those things, we will try and work out what the organisational budget is. That is difficult to do, but in terms of experiential learning, that's what we're trying to do at the moment. So we haven't hunkered down into statutory silos yet in Derbyshire. That point may come when we work out there's enough money to go around. But what we're trying to do at the moment is we're trying to add that up on a system basis and very purposefully describe, if we're putting the patient at the centre of everything, what would that do in terms of altering the overall allocation of resources across the system? It's not easy, it's relatively untested, but that's what we're trying to do. So I wouldn't like to think we've kind of hunkered down into organisational silos. We're very purposefully trying to avoid doing that, even though it's blooming hard.
And will take some time to reconcile the governance in order to work in that way. Yeah. Angie.
I think you've covered it all, Ellen, but just to say that in the chat box as well, that it's the focus on quality, because even, you know, if the quality is not right for patients in South Yorkshire, to use Nora's example, then we will make the change that's needed and the money will follow it. That's where the driver's got to be around delivering provider collabs at scale, that focus on what will make the better difference for the quality of care for patients.
Thank you. Ian and then Paul, and then I'm going to try and bring it to a head. So if anybody else wants to come in, an early indication now will be helpful. Ian.
So sort of, and thank you for the response around the risk. And I think, yeah, that felt like exactly where it was at. So would it help the shadow provider board if we noted this paper and identified that this was one of the key risks that we wanted? Yeah, that we were keen that the provider board sought to mitigate, because the mitigation is actually all of us stepping in a bit more strongly. And actually, we're just providing a bit of leadership. The danger, I guess, is that we all sit around the table. And I know that the two of you are leaders of it, but would it just help you to have the board behind you saying, yeah, we'd like to do this?
It'd be lovely and very gratifying giving our role in provider collaboration. So thank you for that suggestion, Ian. Paul.
Yeah, two things. In terms of making this work better, based on the constraints you've got, is there anything, you may not be able to answer this now, but it may be something the board wants to look at the next meeting or informally, is what could we agree to let go of, which we hold now in terms of delegation, and suggest to others that we're prepared to do that would help the process? I think it's an important question. And my second issue is we talked a lot about the structures, the systems. What's the first change and when we would expect patients to see something different from this?
That's very good. On your first point, Paul, I'm going to suggest that when we give our feedback to the provider collaborative, that we follow through on Ian's suggestion about we would recommend going further, and that we ask the provider collab to ask us what delegations they will particularly appreciate and in what order. On the issue of what patients will see and when, there are lists of clinical priorities, but we're also in the point of bringing more clinicians together, aren't we, Angie?
Yeah, and I'd almost say back, Paul, that we've already seen some of that. So we may not have called it a provider collab, but some of the work we've been doing, patients are seeing the difference because of the way we've been working together. But Helen's right, we said we need a real focus and a prioritisation around the ones that we're going to push on next. So that will come shortly.
Sue, please.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I suppose now Ian and Paul have spoken, they may have said broadly what I was going to say, which was I do think it's important that we can contribute to that and flag the risk that we see. I was definitely with Paul in the when is this going to make a difference and what difference will it make? And I think Hal's made the point as well. And I think that's the biggest risk for me, is that this is a huge amount of effort and work, and at the end of it, nothing's changed. We've just had a different, slight version of an organisation design that. I think that's the biggest risk. So I think, we have to be in it to win it. I think we've been asked to a decision today, aren't we, to say, yes, we take part. I think we have to. It's inevitable. But I think the role we play in shaping the so what and are we really going to lean in to make a difference will be really critical. So I think giving that feedback in and then being very active in it sounds like the best way to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you. And last word to Hal.
Thank you. I'd agree with Sue that there definitely are clinical things that are already happening, that are already making a difference to the patients, but on the whole, they've been led on a kind of more individual collaborations between specialists and individuals rather than on the big provider collaborative type scale. And that's the challenge, isn't it, is to convert that kind of local enthusiasm to do things onto a much bigger scale. And that kind of brings me to the point that I was going to make, is that there is a bit of an elephant in the room here, because quality is absolutely important. But some of the things that we want to do, and certainly in the short term that we need to do, there will be a cost to it. And it may be that 5 years down the line, we get savings because of addressing health inequalities and changing the way everything's done. But Lee would never forgive me if I didn't raise the fact that there's a big financial challenge ahead to the whole system, and we're trying to do that in that context. And that's one of the things that's going to make it really difficult because of the foundation trust, financial accountability bit. It is going to be really difficult. So it's just a note of caution about, there's lots of good thoughts and lots of good motivations to be doing this, but we're going to have to be really brave about the finances, which will be a big risk, but a big prize.
Absolutely, and our financial challenges and woes will be much bigger if the longer we procrastinate in making best use of our resources collectively and together. So I think on the basis of that discussion, it will be fair to say that we are very supportive of the proposals as set out in the paper, and that in our response we will add further depth to our response in the way we've described about our encouragement to go further faster, to be clear about the delegations that would be good to have from constituent provider boards, and also some further thoughts about how it is we manage monies to get best use of that collaboration. So thank you all very much for your contribution to that paper, and Angie and I shall look forward to giving the feedback in writing and in person with some colour and flavour from the discussion today. So thank you for that. And that brings us on, if we may please, to item 5, which is the long awaited and much anticipated green plan. Lee, please.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks in advance to Atul and Jeremy, who reviewed an earlier draft of this, and apologies that in terms of paper deadline, I didn't manage to accommodate the next iteration of proposed eminently sensible changes in terms of the draft. Just to summarise, we had a conversation about this yesterday at Environmental Strategy Group, which is our group that sort of manages this agenda, which reports into HLT. The main conversation in Environmental Strategy Group is how did we now turn this into a staff and public-facing document that was more easily digestible, which is probably quite important. And the proposition there is to very clearly delineate what we're trying to do and why, our plans about how we will do this thing, and where we need staff and patient and visitor help. So there is something that we've got to deliver in terms of a net zero plan for the organisation, which has been informed by the work we've done across the ICS to compare and contrast each organisation's green plans. So there's now a little bit more coherence and similar terminology and a sharing of best practice across the ICS. What we're thinking of doing is linking the launch of this into, from a sort of public comms perspective, into the June the 8th, which is the NHS Environmental Sustainability Day, where we'll clearly describe this is where we're going and this is where we need your help. The section of the report that I would commend to you, noting the earlier comments in the informal section, is we're kind of not trying to boil the ocean on this, and I think we've got a lot clearer view of the risks and contingencies of delivering to this agenda. And I would commend the section of the report that explains there is a big residual risk in delivering net zero to deal with the climate emergency around how we face into hospital heating technology. We could currently try and carve out the site into different cells and come up with ground source heating, or we might need to wait for an emergent technology to deliver that. It's probably slightly with our gift to face into that challenge, but it's a real risk in terms of delivering to the 2032 commitment. Also, a risk around this is capital availability. Thankfully, now we've got a really good view of the right sequence of measures that will have make the most difference in terms of our carbon output. So the work we've had done through Carbon Architects has observed the most sensible things for us to do first are around heating controls and balancing, and around insulation in the hospital will give us most bangs per buck. But that then doesn't preclude wind turbines and photovoltaic to make us a net carbon contributor. There is a particular contingency around NHS supply chain. They need to do a lot of work on our behalf around making the goods and services we procure more environmentally friendly. And then the balance of our overall net zero commitment is reliant on vehicle electrification for both staff and patient and visitor journeys here, which we will contribute to by plans we are making around further EV charging points. And then there's a much wider challenge for us around the decarbonisation of overall electricity generation. And all we're trying to do in that section is point out there's things that we need to do, which we can get on and do now, which we're doing, that's marked up in the report. But there are some key contingencies there around emergent technology around hospital heating, some capital to do more of this work, reliance we'll have to place on NHS supply chain, and broader societal changes that we'll need to deliver all of our commitments to the climate emergency. But I'll stop there, Helen, and I'm taking the paper as read, but adding a bit more flavour. We're a bit topsy-turvy, because we're having the executive conversation at HLT on this on Friday, and we'll give it a bit more shape then around engagement. But happy to take broader comments, and thanks again to Atul and Jeremy who've got it this far, even though I recognise it still ain't perfect.
Thank you very much for that. So in effect, we've seen this before, we've signed it off before, it now has some further changes. There are one or two minor changes to follow, and a lot of work to be done about engagement and implementation. And we're basically being asked for our continuing support for the continuing direction of travel. Yeah, thank you. Atul.
And thanks to Lee as well for being patient with both Jeremy and I's fairly constant nagging about these issues. As he said, there are some more recent comments which will get fed into the document itself. But there's a few things I think I ought to mention, and one in particular, which is that really the urgency of this, I think, still needs to be constantly stated and restated. And we have legal commitments, and it's in law and all of that. And when we compare it to the pandemic emergency, there is still a big gap. So I think we've got to get onto that. Maybe that's part of the hearts and minds things, but we need to keep that at the forefront. There was one small point about, on-site generation of clean energy will be part of any kind of mix of things like that. And I think there was some previous plans with Chesterfield Borough Council to have a windmill on site, a wind turbine on site. So small things like that may be something that we can be getting on with while we wait for some of the bigger issues to be sorted out. And in respect of that, what we're seeing with energy prices now in Ukraine and so on, all of that, the pressure that's it's putting on all of that. It actually makes clean energy much more economically viable, ironically, and for us to get off that oil and gas dependency. So there may well be, and there should be, further funding rounds of some sort or the other. And I would like us to have as a strategic objective that we maintain a state of readiness to be able to exploit any kind of short-term things that the government may come up with, suddenly a pot of money and bid. There was a round of funding before that we narrowly missed, and it would help us do quite a lot of things if we can actually get onto that. So I think that's a very important thing, that we need to maintain a state of readiness. I know, Lee, if you were continuing to be with us, I wouldn't need to say that, but in terms of your successor or whatever, I think it's important that becomes a commitment that is passed on.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Hi, Lee. As you know, I don't normally chip up on the environment and green stuff, but I read this and I read the Joined Up Care Derbyshire one that followed it with interest, because there are clearly things that we can do, but my take on this is there's a huge portion of this which is actually outside of our control, because we don't have the financial capability to do what we need to do. And by that I mean not that the NHS doesn't have the financial capability, but we in Chesterfield and Joined Up Care Derbyshire don't necessarily have what isn't mentioned in here, Lee, but I assume is a significant capital requirement to do some of the more major stuff. So I just found myself thinking, although this is a really sensible plan, surely we also have to address the elephant in the room, which is we can tinker and we can do small stuff, but we can't do the really big stuff unless we're supported to do that. That you might tell me that my take on that is wrong, but that was my conclusion that I drew from reading both of them extensively.
Thanks, Keith. Jane.
So mine's a slightly different point, really, and it's more about the engagement and the communication of it, really. So absolutely applaud the work that's gone into the plan. But I guess for me, trying to sell it to people, I wondered whether we just had some very short, sharp principles that guided all of our decision making around green, and also, or whether it was a charter. But it feels to me like there might be kind of 5 key points that as a trust we would want to say, these are the things around green and sustainability that guide our decision making, and that might help us to kind of embed the thought processes in everything we do. So it was just a comment about kind of making it absolutely fabulous detail and fabulous analysis, but how do we simplify it to make people think it every day?
Thank you very much, Jane. Sue.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to Jane, which is how do we just make it real and live and it just be part of our DNA? And then the second bit, which is building on Atul's point, I'm very conscious that Lee has been kind of brains and custodian and driver and so on of this. And my question is, do we have a skills gap in our organisation in Lee's departure? Because it's quite a specialist area, this, isn't it? I read a lot of it and I don't understand half of it. And I understand a lot of the basic things, but some of the future ambition and the emerging technologies and where we do decide to invest now, where we can because it's right versus where we wouldn't for regretted spend because technology is changing and so on. It feels like we could do with having a guru who just lives and breathes this for us. And I'm not sure if we might have, and I've just missed it. But I think the skills and the knowledge of this are going to be really key for us to make it live and vibrant in the same way that all of our other strategic intentions should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Paul.
A couple of issues. The bill that's going through Parliament at the moment is going to put extra provisions on this issue, so it's not going away. Amendments were passed last week, for example, which have got to go back to the Commons, so it may be that this becomes a central function. My kind of question is, it follows on from Sue. This isn't an issue that just the NHS is dealing with. It's every public sector within Derbyshire will be dealing with this. Universities who we may have links with or we don't have links with within Derbyshire or Sheffield may have an expertise. Have we thought about looking at some form of wider collaborative to meet our plan on this with others in the public sector and academia to help us get there, because everyone's dealing with this, and it's got to be real. So I agree, it has got to be real, but can we do it in a more collaborative way rather than just about the NHS collaborative on this? Because I think it might be worth thinking a bit wider.
Thank you, Paul. Zoe.
Thanks, Helen. Mine was linked to the point that Jane made around engagement, and I agree that Lee said it in his presentation as well. We obviously need something a bit snappier in terms of sort of communicating with colleagues and patients. I think it would be a really good opportunity around the engagement to get input, involvement on what the messages are, and what the key things are, and how we, the kind of language we use, etc. And I'm particularly thinking about a diverse group of people being involved in that, and the generational aspect as well. There was a bit of chat earlier around that. I think that's really important. You know, we'll see the world through certain eyes. So when we talk about engagement, I think we need to have other eyes looking at it too.
Thanks, Zoe. Ian.
Thank you. I'd definitely support the engagement and comms, and as you say, sort of it's across the generations. So I've seen that work very well in other places. I guess perhaps picking up more from Paul's point, almost he mentions the skills. I guess in other places, I happen to be in the housing associations. We draw on people from the Environment Agency and others. We work together across the competitive landscape to do things. Certainly this is in the Bedford area, to do things collaboratively with a number of things. But one of the things that really gives it a push within organisations is getting the governance right. So it's ensuring there's some engagement from a sort of a governance perspective, that we're getting assurance in the organisation. So I guess it's being clear as to which of our committees, or whether it's the board, picks it up as part of the terms of reference. Because I think when terms of reference were written, maybe the green plan, the sustainable plan wasn't part of it. So I guess I'd be encouraging, and they could be. I've seen it in ARC, I've seen it in something a bit like oversight, I've even seen it in people. So I guess I'd say that one of the things that we should look at is just how do we govern it to give it that push, but also to help with bringing the skills into the organisation.
Thank you, Ian. Nora, and then I'll come back to you, Lee.
I agree with a lot of what colleagues have said. For me, the communications part and making the whole green agenda come alive and meaningful in a granular way. So around, how can people save power? How can we look at recycling and waste? How can we cut out plastics? Communities at the moment are really focused in on that. So part of the comms thing is just about capture of data, and how are we going to show that we are actually achieving, and what are we putting in place just to measure and benchmark our organisation against wider organisations, and how are we going to feed that back? I'm sure those plans are already in place. I just wanted to stress the importance of it.
Thank you, Nora. We've got quite an interesting cocktail of things there for you, Lee, to reflect on and reflect back on today and beyond today, I imagine. And a number of them are interrelated. So we've had Jane's suggestion that we have some clearly set out principles or a charter that guides our decision making in this regard. And a suggestion that we need to think about the skills and knowledge and competence and capacity and capability we're going to require, and the fact that that will be easier achieved if we have the right governance over it. And presumably the right governance would also go to the heart of Nora's point about the right data and benchmarks and metrics to monitor and drive the change. So an interesting suite of issues there. We're very happy for you to take them away, but we're also happy for you to comment on them insofar as you'd like to today, Lee. Lee, you're on mute.
Sorry, Helen. Carly's got her hand up. I observe. I'm not sure if she wants to come in, Helen, before I respond. But I'm happy to respond now, just to evidence the things that I think we need to do next, and respond to some of the points.
It's okay, Lee, you go, and then if there is anything, I can pick it up. I think Nora's mainly picked up on my comms point, but I'll come back on comms engagement. Thank you.
So I certainly think there's a sort of urgency restatement piece that we need to do, get that. I think there is those principles that we could do with more clearly describing. I was having a conversation pre-Christmas with another DOF colleague in another organisation who very purposefully was describing a lot of their management and board business. If it didn't contribute to health inequalities and it didn't contribute to net zero, why were they doing it? In terms of changing how they were delivering their services and care, which is a bit extreme, but it's quite an interesting way to look at the world. I think we could probably do with the comms to be really clear on the stuff we can just crack on with and do anyway, versus the stuff where we might need a bit of capital, versus the stuff that needs societal change, and really major on A in the first instance. Just to reassure folk, we are ready to bid for stuff. We've got some off-the-shelf business cases ready to go for balancing and heat stuff, and that's not contingent on me. And in terms of business continuity risk, for the avoidance of doubt, I haven't written any of this, not because I'm idle in this particular instance, but because I was trying to make sure that Sean and Chris Tan could carry this agenda in my absence. So I haven't written any of this document, very purposefully to try and make sure we've got a bit more resilience beyond my departure. We have explored a wider collaboration with local government colleagues and university colleagues. Some of the NHS stuff is quite specific. That doesn't rule out wider collaboration, but we have explored that. And I certainly think we could do with being a little bit Johnnier on the spot about how we're going to monitor the deliverables on this and give it an equal governance emphasis. So we probably need to talk about which board assurance subcommittee is going to do that. But hopefully that's a helpful-ish recap about things that I wrote in my notebook to do summit with beyond this conversation.
And if I might just add to that, it'll be important we have the right governance, but if we do want to work collaboratively with others, we might also want to think about what other governance arrangements there are in the public sector in Derbyshire that we might join, because often it's easier to join other people's arrangements in a show of good faith about that collaboration than have them join ours. So we should probably bear that in mind too. Was there something you wish to add, Carly?
Just I think building on Nora's point and Lee's point from an engagement perspective with the carbon and net zero, I think the most important thing is how is it relevant to the different audiences that we structure this for. The plan on a page, if you like, that's right at the very back of the Joined Up Care Derbyshire in Appendix B is quite an interesting insight into how we promote equal access to carbon travel. And I think that's one of the big things that I would say will give us a how do we make this real? Because we will often find people pragmatically saying, rather cynically saying, we've just gone through a global pandemic, let's look after ourselves, and we need to kind of focus on what that means for people on a day-to-day basis, and then pull them back up and out, if you like. We went through reusable cups and they all stopped, but I think there's a lot more that we can do to make this pragmatic and real, and show how people can deliver that equality of access on a day-to-day basis. But really happy to put a full comms planner around it, and I think it's a really positive way forward to show the ambition of Chesterfield and working with Joined Up Care Derbyshire as well.
Thank you. So I think we'll draw a line under the green plan there for now, and thank you to everyone who's contributed to the discussion, and also to colleagues who've iterated the plan for us. So we'll move to item 6, and item 6 is smoke-free site, and Hal, in time-honoured tradition, is going to lead this discussion for us.
Sorry, I'm chuckling at the startling faces I've just seen in front of me, and especially from Sue, who looked half horrified. And so just briefly, for colleagues who've joined us since this has all been discussed, this has been a very long-standing topic of discussion, and in truth, it's a difficult one to solve. But if I can take people briefly back to 2 years ago, just before the COVID pandemic, we'd had a lot of discussions about the difficulties we'd had with making the site effectively smoke-free, because people, although they're asked not to smoke, do smoke. the impact that was having on colleagues, particularly in certain areas where there was smoke wafting up through windows and so on. So we had what we call a big conversation, which is where there's a big group of lots of staff members who come and contribute ideas and thoughts about what should happen and what shouldn't happen and so on. And and then COVID happened, and so all of the conclusions of that were kind of paused. And actually, as it happens, because we didn't have very many visitors on site for very long periods of COVID, the smoking on site became much less of a problem because people weren't coming in and they weren't smoking. But since we started having visitors again before the latest wave, it was becoming increasingly a problem again, and it's not attractive from the point of view of people arriving in the hospital when there's lots of people smoking outside the front doors, and it's not nice from a health and safety point of view for people who happen to work near those areas where there's smoke. And so there was a very broad conclusion from the big conversation that we needed to do something, and we couldn't just carry on as we were at the moment. It's worth reiterating that whilst we can enforce not smoking to our colleagues, we can't do that to visitors and to patients. We can do it within the hospital, but we can't do it on the site around the hospital because there is no law that we can use to enforce that. And so until there's a national law that makes it against the law to smoke in such situations, we have very limited ways of actually enforcing things as opposed to encouraging people to do it. So the conclusions from that were two things. One was we had two separate smoking policies, which was then causing some confusion for staff and some lack of clarity about what the kind of rules and regulations were, particularly around staff themselves smoking. And the overall conclusion was that we needed to be very clear that staff are not allowed to smoke while they're at work on site, and that's a kind of full stop. And so the paper, with the help of HR and Karen, my general manager, has revisited both of those papers and have rewritten those to make things clearer and more understandable for staff and to be giving a consistent message where it wasn't before. And then the second thing to sort of update on is that whilst this is a smoke-free site paper, one of the conclusions from previous discussions at HLT board and at Council of Governors was that we did need to go ahead with having a limited number, so at the moment 2 smoking shelters on site, which would be away from the entrances, but which would allow us to be directing people to those places to stop the most, the most unsavoury and the most difficult aspects of people smoking on site. So it was a way of managing it, and we said that we would do that for a 6-month period to see if that had an impact on that. There's a bit of a lag time on ordering the smoking shelters. They're ordered and it's happening, and they're likely to go up probably early springtime. That's a really difficult decision that we've made in lots of ways, and it goes right against kind of all my principles as a doctor in many ways, but it is the conclusion we've come to, and I think we need to run with that. And if it works and it helps manage things and makes things better for colleagues, particularly at work, then we continue with that. If it doesn't work, then we should withdraw it. And then the final thing, just to promote, and today is actually National No Smoking Day today, so it's very appropriate that I'm mentioning this, that there is a Derbyshire-wide programme which is mentioned, which is the Tobacco Dependency Treatment Programme, which is enhancing the offer that we give to patients around smoking cessation support while they're in, but also linking to that, we're doing a big push and promotion on no smoking support for our staff, so for our colleagues. And there's a wonderful video, I have to sell it, of myself speaking behind a mask promoting no smoking, which will be going live on Facebook and things today, to encourage people and to flag and to highlight what's on offer from the pharmacy about helping people, because actually people who are given support, both sort of psychological support, which is the Live Life Better Derbyshire bit, but also the actual pharmaceutical aids, are 3 times as likely to give up smoking compared to people who just say, well, I'm going to try and stop. So for any recalcitrant smokers on this board, and I'm hoping there aren't any, then I'd point you in the direction of that, because today's the day to stop. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And important that I think that you've given the history and evolution of this discussion, because you know, it's been a long time in the making. I see we've got a governor who'd like to come in. If you don't mind, Carol, I'm going to come to you at the end, at the end of the meeting, in the interest of good order, as we know, the public meeting. It's a meeting in public, not a public meeting, but I should be very happy to come to you at the end. Paul.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thank you, Hal, for going through the history. That was really helpful and really useful. There's a research out today from the British Thoracic Society, which says that only 45% of those in hospital get a very brief conversation about smoking cessation. How do we monitor not just who gets it, but what they're actually getting and what the outcomes are in terms of helping patients with smoking cessation? So do we have any evidence on that? And we're not just one of the only 45% get a very brief discussion with a member of staff regarding that. Second question is on the smoking shelters. I'm pleased that you share the same view of me. It's a compromise that may be a compromise, but it has to be. Could I ask, it says in the paper that no member of staff will be, it's not acceptable for any member of staff to use those. How will that be monitored? Because it's easy saying in a paper, but how will that be monitored? If those, I mean, it's an important question, because it's really important. But by having them, it sends a signal, and it's, you know, and I just want to understand how that will be monitored, if monitored at all. And my third question is on. It's on considerations given to staff for a week supply of NRT. And I appreciate that we decided not to do it. Do any trusts do this? And if so, how have they got over the reservations that we have at the trust?
Great question, Paul. I'll ask Hal to hold on to those for a moment. Would anybody else like to come in on this paper? Okay, if we go back to you, please, Hal.
So if I try to answer them all. So the bit about the financial support for staff having discounted or free non-smoking stuff for a week was something that came to me a bit out of the blue when I was thinking about all of this only about a week and a half ago. And I was then advised by a mixture of HR and finance that there might be risks to that, to do with financial incentives and tax and legal things. So I don't know is the answer as to whether other trusts have done it. Because of the time scale, because of this being due on the 9th of March, meaning that the relaunch of the smoking, we haven't had time to look in more detail. We had to we can either do it or we can't. And so it was paused, but it is something that we could look into for the future. I don't know the legal situation around what you can offer, but there was a question about whether this was a staff incentive, which might have implications. So that was that bit. The bit about the monitoring the staff shelters, one of the things that was very difficult at the big conversation was a perception that sometimes staff were smoking and that sometimes line managers were smoking, and that wasn't being properly policed and actioned. And that's one of the things that we've at least tried to make clear in the new paper, that this is unacceptable and that the normal the ways of escalating things and disciplinary procedures would happen with that. But we're not planning on having CCTV spying on people at the shelters. That's, you know, we're not doing a sort of Big Brother thing, but we are trying to make it clear that if staff do smoke, and they would be told that they're not allowed to smoke, and that if that was then a repeated thing, then we would ultimately take action against them. And I think that has to be the proportionate response to it. It is difficult, as you know, lots of staff struggle with it anyway. Interestingly, one of the things that caused the greatest concern amongst colleagues was the fact that staff members often took longer breaks away from work in order to be able to go and walk a long way off site so they could have a cigarette. So there's a tricky balance with that. And then the final question regarding the smoking cessation support and the brief advice. So when we've previously audited it, I can't give you the figure, but we certainly do better than 45%. It's previously been a sequence, so there was financial incentives attached to it, and so we did do better than that. But the tobacco dependency programme is part of a big relaunch across Derbyshire to try to give a much enhanced support to people who are going to stop smoking. So the brief advice is good and useful, and I always remember as a medical student being told that, you know, if for every 100 patients that you saw in a clinic, you just mentioned to them smoking was bad for them, one of them might give up. And so you can do those brief advices, but the bigger programme is about having all that wrapped around care and following people up in the community when they go, so they get their 4 weeks supply of smoking cessation things. There's follow-up calls, there's much more active encouragement of people to stop smoking and support around that. And there's evidence from something called the Cure Project, which was based, I think, in somewhere Manchester way, that this actually makes a really big difference to people. And so that if you do that, for example, at the end of if we do that consistently to all the people who come in smoking at the end of the year, that would mean 70 fewer deaths. It would mean, for this hospital alone, it would mean significant decreases in the number of people who are admitted to hospital, because people who smoke have problems with COPD and recurrent chest infections, and that it really does make a difference to that. So we are doing that enhanced package that's being rolled out from now, which is one of the reasons that the paper and the sort of relaunch is happening on all our social media and things. Does that answer the questions a little?
Thank you very much, Hal. I declare that the best conversation we've ever had about no smoking. It was just lovely to talk about what we can actually do to help people, make a choice, a positive choice to give up cigarettes, and how we might support them in that, whether they're patients or staff, and to hear a little bit of the success we're already having in that regard, as opposed to the endless debate of whether or not they get to stand here, there or yonder, as they choose to exercise their choices in these matters. So it was very encouraging. I apologise, John, in concluding that I have overlooked your hand. Do you want to come in?
Everything I was going to say has been mentioned apart from measures. So, Paul, you'll be glad to know that the tobacco dependency programme will be a group of people with enhanced training coming to see these patients, and we will be able to, and are constructing a measurement process for how many people they come and see, just by some simple, email pathways and such like. So we should be able to provide you some data at some point. And just to remind everybody on the board, the size of the prize for this one is, if we manage to get 377 of our patients stopping smoking, one of them will be avoiding having lung cancer. So it's a big prize. The COPD stats aren't to my hand at the moment, but we've been working with Karen Moxon, the general manager, to try and find a rigorous measurement process to see what our success looks like on this, and we'll feedback when we've sorted it. Thank you.
And we look forward to more of those sort of discussions. So thank you very much. Now we're making reasonable time.
Helen, did you want to ask about Carol as well, just because she was?
I wasn't intending to till the end of the meeting.
All right, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, thank you. So we're making reasonable time, and provided we continue to make reasonable time, I think I could declare a 5-minute coffee break. It is 11 a.m. So if colleagues would like to have a cup of coffee and make sure you're back at your desks for 11:05, we will then go on to Ockenden. I've already had a little glimpse of the slides there. Somebody's clearly getting ready for the next item, and it's an important conversation, and we'll do justice to it on our return. So
just some context then. So Donna Ockenden produced sort of a report back in December 2020 about some of the initial findings of a review at the maternity services at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital. there were a number of recommendations that came out, and a year on, we're saying, we've been asked by NHSEI to send, at the beginning of April, our response to where we are against those essential and immediate and essential actions that were identified. All of these actions are together should make a safer service for our women and babies, and should in fact reduce the number of stillbirths and maternal deaths, and should improve the overall outcomes for women and babies. The quote at the bottom here is about trust boards are encouraged. This is what the ask is, to ask themselves whether they really know that mothers and babies are safe in the maternity units, and how confident they are that the same tragic outcomes could not happen in their organisation. And this was a number, it was on the Panorama programme a couple of weeks ago that identified some of those. It was really, really upsetting to hear the accounts of women and families about their ordeal. So if we just move on now to the next slide. So what you won't see in the, if I was to show you the cover of where are we against Ockendom, you wouldn't see necessarily where we as an organisation are with some of our safety outcomes. So there is a national ambition to reduce stillbirths, and they do them in per 1,000 births quotas, if you like, which is a way of capturing it so small and large hospitals can be on an even keel. Here at Chesterfield, we have a rolling average sort of 1.79 stillbirths per 1,000 births. The national average is to try and get that, we're well below that ambition for 2025. We're doing really well, and any stillbirth that we have within the organisation is reviewed. It's done an external review, and any learning that we get from that, we put into a formalised process that we can ensure that any learning that needs to be taken can be undertaken and reported back on. So from a safety perspective, we're doing really well. The other thing that came out of the Ockendom report was about the patients, the mothers not feeling heard. And I won't go through all of the next slide within this, but it's some of the feedback that we're getting. And we do this sort of via friends and family test in one perspective, and then the next slide in a minute will be on the national survey. So we're sort of above average on the amount of women, so a response rate of just under 18% in the last sort of month is better than the national average. It's still not where we want to be, and obviously part of the ask is encouraging women to verbalise through not just our friends and family test, but through Maternity Voices Partnership, which is like an independent way of mothers to raise concerns, so that we can hear all, make sure their voice is being heard. We're above sort of the national average from a friends and family, sort of from a positive point of view. And the National Maternity Survey, which has just been released, we also had 172 of our women to responses received, which is a good response rate. And we had none of the indicators below the national average, and we had 4 questions sort of ranking better and 2 questions ranking significantly better on the national. So when you walk around and we do those board to ward visits, you can feel sort of, and palpably feel sort of the positivity, the passion. And we've had a recent sort of NHSEI visit, and that was there with the commendable and the celebrations that we were told last Friday, that you can see the passion in our staff and the compassion shown to our women and our babies, and that came out in bucket loads, and that we hear that sort of on and see that on a regular basis. So moving into context of what we need to do, so there is an ask for us to share with board about where we are. We've done a number of assessments. Region did assessment on where we were in June. We did another one sort of in February because we wanted to do one before the NHSEI visit. And then we've done where our predicted compliance is in April. And you will see that there is a a significant improvement in those percentages. We're not there on 100% of all of them, but what we have got is a very honest appraisal of where we are, and we've got the commitment and the background support within the care unit and the divisional team to make these happen. So if we just go through some of I've just picked out, there was a slide pack that was sent round that went and RAD rated all of the different aspects of it. The next few slides are really just going about where we were amber or red. What do we need to do? And what you'll see is there are certain things that relate to us, there are certain things that relate to sort of region, to the system, and certain things that relate to region that we need some collaboration to help us identify some of the improvements. We've got so one of the things is that you need an external support to come review some of your cases, and we've struggled with that during COVID, and we're not alone in that. So it's looking and exploring the other hospitals that can come and do a reciprocal arrangement. So it's not saying that none of them are being reviewed, because they absolutely are, but it's saying that we haven't got that. What they wanted is like an independence, and we haven't been able to achieve that in every aspect. So this is what we're doing. Again, we're not dissimilar to other trusts, but it's not where we want to be. There's a perinatal quality surveillance model, and we have a very robust reporting mechanism that goes up to our quality assurance committee that shows a lot of the outcomes and the dashboard data. And this all feeds into, because we actually had an internal audit review that was quite weak in our assurance, because what it demonstrated, which is what we knew at the time, it demonstrated that we needed more rigour with our governance structure within the division. And we've got till our deadline is the end of this month to pull that structure together, which the teams have been doing, and we're on course to make that happen. So this is about strengthening the governance, this is about strengthening so that we hear the voice of our women going forward. Equally, during COVID, we have struggled. We had to cancel the multi-professional training, which it's scenario based. It equips all of our teams with those medical emergencies that happen during sort of obstetric and maternity services. We've scheduled another 3 in that will be complete, but they won't be complete by April. So they've got a trajectory, so that the teams are on it. We also have got the links into, there's a newly formed tertiary centre that we've got pathways that we send our women who need additional support, but what we haven't got currently is to the new tertiary centre, because it's only just been formalised. So that should be an easy one for us to put through our governance process about what those standard operating procedures will look like. We've got sort of elements of Saving Babies' Lives, which has been in existence for a number of years, and we did it was about a 2.5-hour review by NHSEI before Christmas, just after Christmas, it was early January, on our full compliance, and that was 29 pages of embedded documents of where we see ourselves and where we are, and they thanked us for our candour and our pathway on how we can actually improve. And some of this, the improvement is a reliance on our digital solutions. So currently, a lot of this is audit data that we need to produce, and this means pulling notes and flicking through to find the evidence. Whereas we know when we get the new digital solutions, so our K2 system upgrade, that will be able to allow us to pull off that information, releasing clinical time to where it's needed. We've got risk assessments that we've got guidance pathways to be formulated, and the digital solution again to support the risk assessment at every contact. Again, we're not saying that we're not doing this, but we can't evidence currently because it's quite unwieldy, and that's the issue that we've got on some of these aspects. So we've got we've identified a consultant as an interim until a substantial solution can be agreed with our lead obstetrician to be our fetal monitoring lead clinician. So that's in place now, but we've had 4 months. We were compliant with this, but we're not compliant currently because our fetal monitoring lead midwife left, and we've got, I think it's next week actually, we've got 3 external candidates that we're hoping to appoint into. That doesn't mean to say that we're not doing regular CTG monitoring and clinics, because we are, but we haven't got those names in place at the moment. So I say we were compliant, then we're not. And the last one is about the general governance review about the NICE guidance, to make sure that we are up to date with them all, and that which has been actioned by our governance team, supporting the local governance within the division as well, to make sure that we can demonstrate that we're compliant with our NICE guidance, and where we're not, that we've done appropriate risk assessments and we've escalated that appropriately. Just moving on then, so we were also asked, which was a bit of left field, we were also asked in December to look at the Kirchhoff recommendations. These came out in 2015, and a lot that's in there has been superseded by actually better practice. So it's been quite difficult to sort of to have a look and see. So things that potentially were compliant at the time, we've done a where are we at the moment? And if we just go to the next slide, there's one that's red at the moment, but for the next slide, Berenice, thank you. That we are aware of. We've got some actions in place about just refining. So we knew that we'd done some work with the current induction plan going back to 2015 was looked at, but we now need to go back and make sure that that is still fit for purpose and robust. Again, a lot of these things would have been done at the time, but we are, cognizant that we need to go back and make sure that we have a refresh on them. So they're not things that aren't unknown to the care unit or the divisional team. But before we sort of put pen to paper and say we're compliant, we just need to make sure that we've done all the checks and balances to make sure. And we've got an outstanding confidential inquiry from December that needs actioning, and that's the one that's red, and that will be green by the time we sort of submit in another 4 weeks going forward. The last slide, please, Berenice. So this is like the maternity assurance, the next steps. So this is, obviously we've undertaken, we had some verbal feedback last week, which we're already enacting from our critical friend visit from our NHSE and CCG colleagues. We should get the final reports from them the end of this month is what they've said. I've got an interview sort of on Thursday, tomorrow, just to sort of tie everything up. They're definitely sort of from our internal audit, the formal strengthening, we saw this at our last quality assurance meeting, formal strengthening of governance arrangements to address the actions of concern, which was about the governance arrangements and making sure that audits and everything was in place, that we'd got a full, we heard that there's over 200 different aspects of and elements to maternity that we need to be reporting on. And we had a long discussion about sort of feeding the beast. But essentially, these are all things that have been proven that if you do these as together, this will make the outcomes for our women safer. And that's what we need to do and concentrate on. To that end, we're having an extraordinary quality assurance meeting on, I think the date, I've put the date in, I think that has been agreed now, on the 30th of March, to do a robust sort of challenge on some of the assurances. And to be fair, we had one last year that was very sort of maternity centric as well. I think that was February last year. And then we've got some wider stakeholder consultation with the Ockenden and Kirchhoff recommendations before we go to final board and submission for the April 15th deadline. And then we've got some ongoing quarterly maternity sort of update to board on where we're doing sort of that brief synopsis of making sure that board are visible of maternity issues. And I'm happy to answer any questions. You want mute, Helen? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Krishna. That was a great presentation and a just reflection of all the hard work that's been going on by the team. So thank you very much for that. If I can come to Berenice, please.
Krishna, thanks for that. Mine's not a question, it's more a case of I've been fortunate enough to be the exec sponsor for that area, and just that marked difference on working through the months. It's been such a a challenging time for them, not only dealing with kind of the pandemic and all the changes that have happened around that, but also there's been such a focus on maternity services and the number of reviews that they've needed to do, and evidence and pulling information together. And sorry, John, some of our information systems, digital side of things aren't yet fit for purpose, but moving in the right direction. So it's been a real tough time. But the last visit that I did down there, the real positivity from the team and how together, if we talk about our strategy together as one, but really together as one, and the positivity that you feel when you walk through that door. There's laughter, there's a friendly response from people, and when you speak to the women within the department, such positive responses as well. So I think that goes hand in hand with some of the patient comments. So there's been some great work in that department over the last few months. Thanks.
Thanks, Bernice. Do you want to come back, Krishna?
Yeah, thank you, Bernice. I think one of the proudest things, I think, from the visit sort of last week was the teams articulating that they feel it's a safer place to raise concerns, because this is one of the, the crux of the matter, that you've got to be a safe space. You're independent practitioner, being a midwife, but you work hand in hand with your obstetric colleagues, and sometimes the relationships between those teams can be really quite sort of difficult. We haven't got that here. There's definitely sort of barriers that have broken down. They feel that they're able to raise concerns sort of out with their care unit. They felt listened to, and I think when you look at, there will be more coming out from, so Ockenden 2 is set to come out at the end of this month. There will be more about what we need to do, but what NHSEI saw when they came in was actually we've got a very collegiate, we've got a very passionate workforce working hard together with some really good plans now and some really robust risk and governance metrics that are going to help us and to help them be able to do their job effectively. And we've already got good outcomes. And I've said from the start of being at Chesterfield, we've got good outcomes for our women and our babies, and we've got really good patient experience. And we still have, and we've got all the elements that Berenice just articulated as well to have that platform of improvement. But I'm really proud of the teams. They did themselves proud last week in particular. They've worked hard.
Thank you, Krishna. Jane.
It's difficult to follow all that, isn't it? But I just wanted to say how proud I am of everybody that's working in maternity, from midwives, obstetricians, support workers, everybody, because actually, what we've shown through all of the processes that we're having to work through, Ockenden, Kirchhoff, CNST, Saving Babies' Lives, as you heard Krishna say, there are 250 plus key deliverables that they're having to be measured against. And that's an incredible burden for staff. But through it all, what we've always said is that our outcomes are good, our patient experience is good, and that's something that we should be proud of. But our weakness has been demonstrating that absolutely robustly against all of these key lines of inquiry. So we really welcome the work that the divisional improvement lead has done in order to kind of map all of those key deliverables and make it as easy as possible for us to demonstrate that. And that, coupled with K2 and the digital agenda, is really going to help us. So I know that not all of the board members will be as familiar as I am, sitting as a maternity safety champion, but you can see as well in the IPR now, we've got some maternity indicators that you can keep your eye on every time you review the IPR. And also, as Krishna said, one of the things that we just need to tighten up on a little bit as well is the report directly to board, and that is particularly around serious incidents. So it's likely it will be a report in private, but that's one of the criteria that we just need to meet. Those things have been discussed at Quality Assurance Committee and onwardly reported to board, but the whole board, it's clear, has to have visibility of that rather than just a limited number of us. So I just really wanted to say thank you to everybody, and also actually thank you to the board, because actually you've supported the submissions that we've made for finance to support all of the improvements under Ockenden, and also actually supported Krishna in being able to over recruit. So we are over establishment in maternity at the moment, and that is really good, and it was very positively received from NHS E&I, because actually in the current workforce difficulties, you know, that is quite a significant achievement. And I think we have to recognise that actually the number of bookings at our unit are going up because there are difficulties in units around us, and that also is tantamount to the excellent care that's actually provided at Chesterfield.
Thank you very much, Jane. And of course, it will be completely inappropriate to let the opportunity go by to thank you for your role in this as the maternity safety lead. So thank you. John.
Thank you. I just I was going to mention the transformation processes and how the deliverables are easy to see now, and the fantastic work that's been done in improvement down there, which has started to enable cultural change. I won't go into that in any more detail because James just said it, but I also wanted to make the board aware of the digital solution, which is K2, is not just Chesterfield forging ahead in rebuilding its maternity EPR, which it is, but it's also been fortunate enough to be able to get a regional wide bid. So this will be exactly what Derby are doing as well. So they will be fast followers behind us in our journey here. So for those important cohort of patients that live in the watershed area about where they may go if they need to go to hospital for their birth, for instance, this will be the same system which will be able to be viewed joined up care Derbyshire wide, which is a really important part of our convergence strategy for digital in joined up care Derbyshire, and it's excellent to see that the trust is leading the way on that. So I just wanted to give that for information. Thank you.
And thank you for your leadership of that agenda, John. Atul.
Thank you, and I just add my congratulations, Krishna, to you and your team. I mean, so much work has been put in, and really appreciate all the good that's come out of it. I guess my worry is a little bit about the cost of all of this. So we know we have good outcomes. When I used to be a regulator, we were constantly trying to get away from so much process and focus on the outcome. So where you have good outcomes, and you can still have improvement from those outcomes without having these, 250 deliverables, plus more coming with Ockenden 2, it must create some kind of pressure, just, the mental and other pressure on staff to make sure that they're recording things and making sure the evidence is there should somebody ask for it, and how that they split their time between doing that and actually providing that excellent care to the babies and to the mothers and their relatives that come in. And a question perhaps for Lee as well, do we in the NHS and our trusts and all these kinds of things actually measure the costs of compliance as opposed to the costs of patient care? This is my constant worry, I have to say, that we will fall over not on our caring, but on our form filling and being able to prove that we did what we did.
Thank you very much. I think that's everybody who'd like to come in on this item. And I think it now just rests for us to say thank you once again, and to know that the agenda is in safe hands under Krishna's leadership and under Jane's chairmanship of the Quality Committee. And of course, we've been put on notice of enhanced reporting to board, which we very much look forward to. So well done. I'm going to move on to item 8, and item 8 is the patient and staff experience report, and this is going to be introduced by Krishna and Zoe.
Thanks, Helen. So in our usual style, I'll kick off and I'll hand over to Krishna. There's a couple of things I wanted to pull out from the paper from a staff experience perspective, and they're both linked to some of the work we're doing around reviewing and evaluating some of the things we do around staff engagement. Firstly, the staff mentor partnership, which is described in the paper we've talked about before. We're in our second year now, and we had the sort of check-in meeting recently with the mentors, and there's some of the feedback from that discussion in the paper. I think in summary, it's proving to be of value for participants all round, really would be my summary of it. And people are using it in different ways, and they also use that as an opportunity to talk to each other about what's working well in the different sort of partnerships, and so they could take that back to their own partnership. So the feedback I've had from a written and verbally from some of the people as well has been really positive. And secondly, our exec sponsor approach, which Berenice has talked about already in the earlier item, we're approaching that time of year where we'll be reviewing our teams. So we'll be doing that later this month, looking at the people and patient metrics and sort of local intelligence as well in the mix of that too. And as part of the process this year, this was something that came on board a few months ago. I think it was yourself, Jane, if I remember rightly. And there's a question around sort of feedback from the teams as to kind of the value again. So that's something that we'll be doing this time around by way of a short survey, which will be sort of anonymous, so disconnected from us, if you like. So we'll be undertaking that as well. So we'll be able to sort of feed that in too. So come May, we'll be able to bring back the revised teams. And I'll hand over to you, Krishna.
Thank you. So just on that same theme with the exec sponsors, so we have our regular sort of monthly engagement meeting with Phil Terry, our CQC lead. And one of the things that we are trying to advocate, sort of every meeting we showcase some real positives. So one of them, sort of last time that we met was about sort of the Improvement Academy. This time it will be Abby and our Freedom to Speak Up offer and how well we're doing as an organisation. But we had a conversation about exec sponsors. So for those new to board, the exec sponsorship isn't something that is widely replicated across the country. It's quite unique here, and it gives a real good insight to us as execs to really get underneath. So sort of some of those areas, so that when I'm talking about maternity, Berenice can articulate from her perspective as well, and as a real sort of review of what's actually happening. And I think we can't underestimate that. So I really enjoy doing the exec sponsor bit. I think it's really, really rewarding. We'll have to see how it's received, I suppose. But, the feedback that we've done exec sponsorship and doing listening events, and that has been received really well in all the areas that we've done them in to date. And we can't underestimate where that is. The other thing I wanted just to sort of to talk about was one of the things that we're doing on the back of our NHSER visit is moving the real-time patient experience feedback, which is the care opinion, into maternity sooner than we probably potentially planned. But some of that is because we're getting quite a bit of feedback from women using maternity services. So we're using that and going through our Maternity Voices partnership to showcase that as well, so that we can try and get some sort of live feedback about what we're doing. So we've started in surgery, and we'll from next month we're going to go into maternity to enhance our feedback mechanism, so that we can try and look and see what else we can do to improve things sort of timely. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you both. Any comments or questions on this item? Sue?
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, Krishna, you just mentioned there about the care opinion. I realise I'm slightly out of touch with where we are in that, because I think in the paper it says the implementation plan is being progressed, but then you're quoting from it, so it's obviously in use. But could you just update me on where we are with that and when we will see more of that?
So we started on 4th of January, but at the moment, so we've been doing some training with the senior leads in surgery, but it's been live so that we can actually interact with it, and I've done it, as well as the governance team have been doing it in January and part of February, and we're just transitioning to support our colleagues to do the real-time feedback in surgery, and then we'll move to midwifery. So it can be a bit onerous. So what you can do is you receive a comment, and then you can put that comment back. If there's something that we're addressing, you can say that we're addressing it there and then. You can also say what improvements we've made. So I've gone back into, now we've had the licence, I've gone back into it. So there was certainly some areas about antenatal, and I went into the two ladies that had raised that. about the weights in antenatal and what we've done. Thank you for your comments, and this is what we're doing currently about it, and we're monitoring sort of those weights. So it gives us a way of actually, you wouldn't get that from if you were just doing a friends and family. You wouldn't get the, do you know what, we booked in at this time and we've been waiting and this isn't the first time. Is there something you can do to streamline that process? So it will help inform some of the improvements on a level that you wouldn't normally get with your friends and family feedback. And we can do timely, and we can do it more of a chit chat. We can chat offline. We can do a variety of things that can make it timely, but actually more personal for the person. And you know, people don't want to have a 6-page letter actually as a response. They want a quick, an easy solution to their angst at that time, wherever we can do that and to be listened to, and that response going back in a friendly. And what the hope is for our ward sisters to be able to do that timely. That's what we're hoping to have, so that there is that dialogue and to be resolving some of those issues at the ward level. But we've got visibility from an organisation point of view.
Thanks, Krishna. No, I agree. And you're preaching to the converted about that real-time feedback. I think what I realise I've probably lost sight of a bit is it now live for every patient to use? And if so, are we going to start seeing some reporting across every service on the back of that? Because that patient insight is really valuable, isn't it?
They can. Any patient can use it. So what we've tried to do, so we've gone with surgery, and we've got the cards, the banners, and everything around to implement from a surgical point of view. And once that's there, then we can go. So you can do it from a card basis. We can do it from our comms, and I know Emma's linking in with Carly on the comm side of things as well. But it's a portal that's out there that people can use now. We're just monitoring it because obviously we're getting comments in from a wide variety of services within CRH.
And sorry, just one final question, and I will take this offline. But so, do we actively seek it and say, can you go and have a look and fill this in, or as in we push it to patients and ask for feedback, or is it just there for patients if they want to use it and find it themselves?
Currently, it's there for all patients, and we're pushing in the areas that we're launching it in. So in surgery, we're pushing it. Then maternity, we're pushing it, and we'll push it with external partners as well to make sure that it's there. So it will be both. It will be both. It's just not quite there yet, and that's the sort of the implementation plan that we're.
All right, thank you.
I wonder if I might volunteer you, Sue. Sue is deeply experienced with reporting from real-time feedback. So I'm sure if you wanted to take her counsel on what sort of reporting might best inform board discussions, she might be happy to help. Is that fair, Sue?
Yes, I'd be delighted.
Thank you very much. Volunteers worth 1,000 depressed men. Paul, please.
Thank you, Krishna, and thank you, Zoe, for that. That's helpful. Just one thing that jumps out at me is the sickness and absence rolling 12 months is the Devonshire ward, which seems a bit of an outlier. Is there a reason for that, and what are we doing to support and mitigate that?
So this is one of our surgical wards, and it's actually, Berenice, do you want to?
I'm exec sponsor for that area, Paul, and I think what's been indicated, and please don't think we haven't done any work with Devonshire, is that we previously had 2 surgical ward areas, and we had a level of skills and expertise that was dedicated to those areas. Because of the reconfiguration, we've now merged a lot of skills onto one area, and it has become really quite a demanding ward, and trying to keep those skills up. And I think that has definitely had an impact on the staff, and the reviews and the conversations that we've had with the staff have identified that, and has certainly led to some of the sickness. The HR, Zoe's maybe going to come in here, but the HR partner that works in surgery absolutely supports with those conversations and trying to get people back to work quite quickly. The other element is that what we also see is when we've had an outbreak on that particular area. As that ward area clears, you then have quite a bit of capacity, and with COVID increasing, we've then had to move COVID patients onto that area as well, and so the change again in skills that's required has impacted on the staff. I mean, don't get us wrong, this has been across the board, but I think that one particular area where you need specific skills and those staff have been moved around quite a lot within the hospital has certainly contributed to that. We have done quite a lot of focused health and well-being, and we over recruited, and we've recently, Krishna might like to come in here as well. We're busy developing kind of a compact around ward moves for the staff, so that we understand what the expectations are if they actually move, and some of that has absolutely come out of listening to the teams on Devonshire ward and some of the experiences that they've had on going to other areas. Zoe, sorry, do you want to jump in?
No, don't apologise, Bernice. That was really helpful. Thank you. Just a couple of things to sort of add and build on that. So I am assured, so can give assurance that the division, the HR partner, are really close to the detail of the particular cases, and that's something we talk about at every assurance meeting with the execs. So I kind of am assured in terms of what we're doing about it, that's kind of cited and it's moving on. And the other thing to add is that, as well as some of the things that Bernice has described in the exec sponsor work, the divisional leadership team have done some focused work with the ward team as well, to recognising some of the challenges and the problems. So.
Paul.
That's both reassuring but a little worrying in terms of some of the things that have been said. Could I ask a supplementary question then? I appreciate a lot of hard work and support's going on around there. In terms of your planning and what's been put in to mitigate, when would we see the levels of sickness absence come down to what would be normal within the trust? What's the planning and the assumptions for what you've done to try to get it to a level which would be within the normal range?
For that particular ward? Yeah, well, some of it's around individual reasons for sickness absence as well, a mixture of long-term as well as the short-term impact. So I can take that question, we can raise that specifically at the next divisional assurance meeting, and I can feed back to you, Paul, if you would like.
I think so. It's just that it's such an outlier that I just need some reassurance that what's happening will bring it back to a level within a period of time. But thank you.
Yeah, I guess it is an outlier, and of course these are only the rates for the exec sponsor teams. So there'll be other teams, for example, particularly smaller teams where you've got a team of 10, saying you've got one person off, then clearly that looks quite big too. So yeah, within the group we've got, they are an outlier.
Thank you. And thank you again for the report. And great to hear about the progress that's being made in all of those regards. So we go on now to the last substantive item of the meeting, which is item 9, which is the board assurance framework. For those who are joining the meeting today, this is a really important set of reports because it's our opportunity as a board to receive assurance from each of the committees, and across the committees we manage to have oversight of the work of the entire breadth of the Trust's business. And in areas where it's not possible to provide assurance, matters get escalated to board. And within each of the committees take responsibility for having oversight of the relevant parts of the integrated performance report. So it's really where performance and risk and assurance and escalation of matters to board, where board need to have some further intervention happens. So very important set of items, and hopefully a bit of helpful context for visitors today. So we're going to start, please, with the report from the chair of the Audit Committee, please. Are you there, Ian?
Yeah, sorry, my button was escaping me. Yes, thank you. The report of the audit committee. I guess I might, just before I talk about the audit committee report on page 167, just duck back to the page 166, which just shows all 5 BAFs. And I guess it would just be an observation that effectively a number of those BAFs were uprated. Their residual scores were uprated last April. I think 4 out of 5 were uprated. And over the year, we've maintained the residual risks at those scores. And actually only one of those risks has been re-rated downwards. So I guess as an overall trust, and I would be very much supporting where Helen is, that of course across all the committees we have all of our different lines of assurance. We are continuing to show quite a high level of risk across the BAFs, and a higher level of risk than perhaps we had last year. We haven't reset downwards, and I guess that's not only the circumstance of the situation that we find ourselves in, but it's also just a sort of test as to how effective the mitigations are to manage the risks. And I guess that's probably my lead in to say one of the things that ARC is doing, and just in the report, and you'll see it in the main report as well, is that we're just focusing on sort of the key highlights of BAF risk 3 at the sort of 3 key areas, and really checking on, are the mitigations effective? Because if we've got mitigations as not effective, then actually there may be things that we're doing that we perhaps would do better to do other things. So I guess it's really trying to get behind the mitigations and see, are they impacting the risk and moving the risk down on a residual basis closer to our risk appetite. I guess if just turning to the audit and risk report as a whole, which is on page 167, you'll see us recording that discussion on BAF risk 3. I think what we're really encouraged is that Krishna with Anne Rolfe is doing work on the risk register for an operational basis, and we have plans to meet and really work out how the operational risk register feeds into the BAF risks. The BAF risks being really the strategic risks, but clearly operational risks are linked to that. I think one of the things, and I would say this as somebody new coming into the trust, I was surprised at the amount of what I would call compliance work that the counter fraud team were doing, rather than active sort of analysis and audit and control work. And one of the things that we're looking forward to in the next year is having more proactive work in the counter fraud area. And probably the only other thing I would pick out, and obviously we've gone through the process, and it's the governors have made the appointments, is that we've made the appointment for KPMG for the next 3 years going forward as our external auditors. So they're doing the external audit for this year end, which will start obviously after the 31st of March. But they're also now appointed for the next 3 years. So I think those will be the ones I'd pick out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please maybe go to oversight next.
Thank you. I mean, not a lot to report from oversight. There are 2 high risks. One's the potential for a cyber attack, cyber risk, which ongoing mitigations and support is being done. And the second one was the number of people who weren't available staff-wide for COVID-19 at the point that the report was written. There are a couple of issues which I think, as a new chair, I didn't fully understand, and we are looking at those, and I've raised those and along with it. One is the link to counter fraud and how that links back to the oversight committee in terms of DFSF, and also the role of internal audit. And I think you'll see at the next set of report that I've asked for the committee to consider its work programme, and I think a little bit more broadly about how DFSF is helping to contribute to the outcomes of the trust, and there'll be a discussion of that, and then some of the implications for risk and how we monitor that going forward.
Thank you very much, Paul. Finance and performance, please, Keith.
Thank you, Helen. I think I'll start with the fact that the committee have reviewed and we've altered the rating on both BAF4 and BAF5 to limited assurance rather than significant assurance. There's good reasons for those. From a finance point of view, it's not related to the current H2 and the year we're in now. It's related to the regime for 2022-23. We have a specific finance and performance meeting at the end of this month to dig into that with a little bit more depth. And that's primarily around the fact that when we met in early February, there was still a lack of clarity, shall we say, Lee is nodding, about that regime and how it's going to be implemented and how we're going to manage it. So we concerns, I think, about the level of saving, concerns about our ability to deliver to that level of saving required in the system, and working both as a system and then CRH within that system. So we felt we had no option but to move our assurance from a finance point of view from significant to limited while we review that and look in more detail at the process. As I say, we have a meeting specifically on finance at the end of this month, and that will give us a better view, as Lee will be in a more able to describe that in a fully formed way than we were when we met at the beginning of February. From a performance point of view, I think the committee noted Berenice's and the team's concerns, I think, and challenges around the national requirements that have been have come out from NHS-E&I, and the difficulty in both working through those, but also the realistic difficulty in delivering all of those simultaneously. They are extremely challenging, we were presented the Joined Up Care Derbyshire, of which we're part of, kind of transformational plans from Maria Riley and her team in a great level of depth, but we are very much at the beginning of that journey, and therefore it's impossible to do anything other than give limited assurance at this point to those plans. But they are incredibly complicated. There are a considerable number of moving parts, of which we are some of. And at this stage, we can only give a limited level of assurance as our ability to deliver against them. And that's not because the plans are inappropriate or not right or not detailed enough. They are, but we're very early in that system. And I think, therefore, we can only give limited assurance given the site that we've got. Our next F&P meeting is in either April or May, I can't remember. And we'll obviously have another view from Berenice and the team then in terms of performance at that point. But I think the summary is that we're moving both our assurance ratings to limited on both finance and performance because of the current environment that we are in at the moment in both those areas.
Very helpful. Thank you, Keith. Jane, please.
In terms of Quality Assurance Committee, from the report, I just wanted to highlight a few things. So in terms of emergency preparedness, Berenice presented us with an update. Previously, we had limited assurance on her paper and on processes, etc., but we moved that to significant assurance at this last meeting, and that was in recognition of all the work that's gone on that agenda. I wanted to just draw attention to the staffing report, just because actually it was in a really good format to show us very clearly the implications on quality of care where we've got red flags against staffing. So great piece of work by Sarah Ward, which means that the committee could really be focused on the impact. So, for example, if we got low levels of staffing, is there an impact on pressure ulcers or falls? So that was actually a really, really good report to receive. As always, we've kept our eye on stroke and clearly still looking at outcomes for patients, but also monitoring the improvement work and also recognising all of the conversations that are going on in the system. But again, we were pleased to note the improvement in the National Stroke Audit, the SNAP data it's called, moving us again from a C position to a B position, which is actually really, really good. Maternity, we've heard a lot about maternity this morning and we had a long discussion. We had an absolutely fabulous presentation on all of these governance processes and how the divisional improvement lead is kind of pulling together all of those key deliverables that you've heard about. And whilst we absolutely recognise the system is in place, and we actually left maternity on limited assurance until we can actually see the impact of that work, and also because we were recognising that imminently we were having the visit from NHSEI and the CCG, and also because of the backlog on incident management, which again is of concern, but there are measures in place to improve that. So the maternity paper itself, we left at limited assurance, but we are not recommending at this moment in time that it impacts the BAF strategic risk 1, pending our obviously further review on maternity at the end of March. I do expect, if I'm honest, that in May that we will have significant assurance around everything on maternity. I think our processes are in place. It's just a matter of getting them embedded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And People Committee, please. Sue, I think you're stepping in Jeremy's absence. Thank you.
I am, yes, thank you, Helen. Not a great deal to say really on People Committee. There was just a couple of things I did want to point out. One of the things was we spent quite a long time actually on talking about essential training, which we always talk about, and in particular we talked about fire safety. I just wanted to call that out because people may read that and feel slightly alarmed, because it does show the largest decline. So I'm not going to go over the content of the conversation. That's not the point of this, other than to say we felt assured by the end of that conversation that the right actions are being taken. We will keep a watching brief on that. We'll certainly look back at it again next month. But we had a good conversation around that, and we're comforted that we have the right plans in place to be back on track. And then the only other thing really that I wanted to call out, in the staff engagement, including racial equality, it does say in there's a couple of things just to bring out a little bit more. It says that a number of activities have been undertaken by the Royal Cultural Committee Group during Race Equality Week, but I think it's just worth saying that that's not the only, whilst that's super important and was really impactful, there's always work going on in this regard, and certainly there are lots of other colleagues. So for example, in Zoe's team, working with one of the RCC members to develop the webinar and so on. So it's just to not to give the impression that it was just a little one-off in that week, that actually there's a lot of ongoing activity. And it also says in the report that we talked about targets and said we would come back to that at another time. But again, of course, it's not the first time we've talked about targets. And in fact, Zoe and Tim have done some work on that already. And in fact, there is a target in the annual report relating to leadership roles for targets for BAME. So again, we'll revisit that and just make sure it's the right target, but also maybe we need to do a bit more to amplify the fact that those targets are already being worked through. And apart from that, I think that was all I really wanted to say, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sue. Now, I'm going to open it up as we always do, and we can kind of consider what we're hearing in the round. But before we do, if I could go to Ian in the first instance, because obviously you'd have read the reports, Ian, but having heard the reports now, and in the context of ARC taking something of a kind of cross-cutting view of issues and risks, is there anything further you'd like to add before we open it to colleagues more widely?
I don't think so. I mean, I think all the committees are. I think that the challenge is that I sit there and say everyone's incredibly busy doing what looks like good stuff. It's just really working out, are these the stuff? Is this, in inverted commas, the stuff that's really going to shift the dial on our risks? Because sometimes is it going to move our risk? And if it's not, is it still the right thing to do, or have we actually mismeasured our risk? Sometimes it allows us to just sit back and think about that a bit more. I guess if there was one thing, and I'm very conscious that Jeremy is not here, I guess I do look at it and I'm always surprised when I see a risk appetite that is so far away from where the residual risk position is. Because I guess one of the things about risk appetite is, yes, it's got to be looking at our long-term view, but it's got to seem and feel an achievable target, because actually many organisations you'd be sitting there and saying you'd be operating closer to your risk appetite in areas, because if you can't close the gap, then you need to almost change the way that you approach certain things. So I do have a slight concern here that, again, we have risk appetites that are universally below our residual risk position, but actually, yeah, in a couple of areas they look almost an appetite that's we can't ever meet effectively. So that will be one observation about just how do we have the interface between the activities on mitigations, the residual risk, and then where our appetite is.
Very helpful, thank you, Ian. Colleagues, any thoughts, questions, or queries? No, Nora.
Sorry, it was just about where business continuity and EPPR fits in. It's briefly mentioned in quality assurance, but obviously we've made an appointment within that area, and I just wondered where we were going to be following that through.
Berenice.
Yeah, just there was an agreement, Nora, that EPRR, because it affects quality and safety of the whole organisation, would feed into the quality committee. So therefore, a regular report of the progress that we've actually made will go to the quality assurance committee regularly. The last couple that has gone in has been very much focused around our compliance against the core standards, and has obviously moved from the fact that we only had partial assurance to we're now completely on track with the timetable that we've set to be compliant during this year, and would flag up any issues. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. It was because we hadn't met the core standards that I wondered where we were just tracking it through and if that was coming through, because there was only a little line against it. That's fine, thank you.
I wonder if we might also ask John to note an action for us around that, to consider the role of the quality committee in this regard vis-a-vis Nora's champion role on EPRR, because I think that will be helpful to make sure that we understand how that's going to work together, but we can do that offline. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to all the committee chairs and all the members of the committees for all their hard work. There's a huge amount of work that goes on in between each board meeting, and it's a matter of a lot of hard peddling that has allowed us to be in the fortunate position to accept those reports with the relative ease with which we have, because of the work that's been done outside of this particular meeting. So thank you to all involved. The next items on the agenda are either by consent. I've had no advance notice, so I'm assuming they're all approved and agreed as set out in the relevant papers. And then we have items for information. So that brings us to AOB. Are there any items of AOB? No items of AOB. And then that brings us to the very end of the meeting. And I'd like to, if I may, before we review the meeting, go back to Carol. Carol, you were moved by one of our earlier items, and it will be good to know what you think about the whole issue of no smoking.
It was really just sort of asking how. I mean, I know it's been raised at the staff forum forever, and the solutions are extremely difficult. And I know it was raised as one of the in the big conversation is having the resources and the staff to be able to take patients down to either a designated area or just to the nearest back door. And if we're aware of how often that happens, how often that might happen when the shelters are provided, and just how often some patients need escorting and staying with while they're having their cigarette. Really, I know it came up on the big conversation. I didn't know if managers had been given any guidance to sort of help them to manage that situation.
Great question, Carol. Hal.
It is a good question, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because very often when the staff are taking patients down, it's in a situation where the staff member is very much thinking it is helpful for their overall care. So I'm thinking of, you know, a withdrawing alcoholic on Ridgeway Ward who needs a cigarette to calm them down, or a teenage child who's in distress in CAMS, and it's part of the kind of safe space for them. It happens already, as the reality is that staff do support patients in that way when the patient needs individual escorting and support. So I think the new process and having smoking shelters won't make that any different. It is always an individual decision, I think, that's being rightly made by the clinician who's looking after the patient at the time about how best to help and support them at the time. And if that includes going and escorting a patient who's maybe, you know, as I say, maybe withdrawing and might be a bit confused and agitated at the time, then sometimes that will be the right thing for the individual patient. Does that sort of partially answer what is a difficult
It does. I think everything to do with smoking on site is difficult, so I do appreciate that. I think it was really about if there's a specific guidance that managers can follow, or as you've said, if it's down to individual circumstances in individual wards and departments, which it probably is.
I think we have to trust the individual areas on it a bit in this one.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Carol, could I ask you to lead off in the review of the meeting? How did you find today? Do you think, are you more or less assured that Chesterfield is in good hands? What were your other views on the proceedings?
It's absolutely enormous. You know, I think the one thing that I had was at one point where we were talking about funding and integrated care, it sounded like the trust or every trust is being asked to bake a cake with half of the ingredients. And no instructions as to how long it should go in the oven for, and that was that was my very naive thought of, my goodness, I wouldn't know how to do any of that. So yeah, sometimes I think that the things that we're being asked to do are very, very complicated because the instructions aren't clear, and it is just amazing, especially, and I know I've said it before, you know, when you talk about integration, you know, the conversations of merging health and social care budgets and working together, I remember having in 1980 in Social Services Department in Sheffield, and I'm thinking, crumbs, we're still having to do that, really. And it's sad that we're still having to do it, but it's good that we've actually got very passionate people who are committed to doing it, in that, you know, we might stand a chance of getting that as a result of a pandemic and having to think as much about social care as the NHS. So that's quite encouraging. But yes, just trying to keep track of all the bits of paper and everything that's written down, it seems very daunting for somebody 2 months in.
Well, you don't sound at all daunted to us, Carol, but we're very grateful for your time. Margaret.
Hi. First of all, apologies for my late attendance. It's a very long story, which I won't go into, but I'd intended to be with you from the beginning, but never mind. Yeah, it's a fascinating meeting. I mean, there were lots of interesting topics, which is why I wanted to be at this one. And just picking up on Carol's analogy, which I also think was a brilliant analogy. We'll keep that one in mind about baking a cake without the ingredients. It's always interesting to hear a bit more about provider collaboratives and try and get my heads round it, but it's still difficult. And especially good to hear Nora actually picking up something that came up from one of the governor induction sessions yesterday and following that through. And I wish that I think it was John that asked the question about us, still sending patients outside of our own ICS. I wished he'd been on the thing to hear actually that it did get raised, it did get discussed, and thanks for that, Nora. So that's just seeing that our sort of feedback through to non-execs in action was really good. So yeah, thanks for that. That's, but yeah, I've made lots of notes about things that I might want to follow up or think that governors might need to follow up on in future. So yeah, really good meeting.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Judith. Are you there, Judy?
Just to follow up, I'd just like to reassure Carol, I'm just starting my 9th year. and I still swim around in a fog at these meetings sometimes, but they're very educational. And also your brilliant analogy about cake making. I actually would like to add something to say that the cake maker has actually got their arms maybe tied behind their back, so they don't even know which ingredients to pick up. That's not being unduly negative. Positive, I'm absolutely delighted about the Ockenden, because I seem to remember of one of the very last visits I did before the dreaded COVID struck. I'm absolutely sure it was a midwifery one. And I know that certain of our visitors were very concerned by what was happening there. So I think that is absolutely brilliant news. And I would want to commend everyone for the work they've done. The slightly negative one, I'm being an OU lecturer here, I think. The slightly negative, not criticism, but comment, was just a phrase I picked up halfway through about the immense level of ambiguity in joined up care Derbyshire. You know, as a conceptual thing, I think it's absolutely great. But like you, Carol, I'm seriously worried. I'm trying hard not to say you've been there, seen it, done it all before, got the video. It would be a tragedy if, because of the complexity and the local people trying to make this work, are having their hands so tied by ongoing differences as what's important and what isn't important. So please keep fighting, but it must be so hard. And again, thank you to all of you that have been working and will continue to work to make this a reality, because if we don't get community involvement right this time, I personally feel we're in deep trouble. And the last one is another positive, and I don't like to talk about myself, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to the Trust. And I was a bit late arriving, I just couldn't get logged in. I have recently had to use the Trust, not me personally, but my partner has. And they didn't know who I was, because I just delivered my partner and we were masked and everything else. And my partner has said just how wonderful and efficient the referral to an urgent outpatient's appointment was. It was gone from the GP within the appointment was offered same day. The appointment came 2 weeks' time. The procedure's been carried out, and the support while we're waiting for the results of it has been superb. And so I would like to say a very big personal thanks to the Trust for something that could have been relatively simple, but is worrying all the same. So, and also an amazingly well conducted meeting. It's wonderful to see non-execs really asking good questions and supporting at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, and very speedy recovery to your other half, Judith. But lovely to hear that, well looked after with us. Krishna.
Thank you, Helen. It was just sort of just wanted to raise. So last meeting, Pervez asked about 3 different questions, but we invited him to the Quality Assurance Committee to have those questions sort of aired in a sort of rounded discussion. So it's just to feedback that we always do value the questions sort of that are raised by all of those sort of our governor colleagues, and we will try and answer. I think it was because there was 3 very distinct separate things that he wanted some a bit more of a deeper dive and a bit more of a discussion about. But we're hoping that he's fed back that he's felt assured about that. But we felt that was the right thing to invite him to that meeting to sort of air some of those concerns.
Thank you, Krishna. Helpful to be reminded of that. And as you say, we always value governors' inputs, and particularly governor attendance at board, because I think it really helps you play your very fullest part when you're at Council of Governor meetings then. So thank you for that. I'm going to give the last word to Kevin Sargent, if I may, please. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, Kevin's going to be the interim medical director. So I'm hoping after this morning's meeting, you're still going to be the interim medical director, Kevin.
Yes, that was a great educational experience for me. I was, what's the word? Encouraged and impressed with the depth and range of challenge given to all the topics, and that's something that I will take forward with me as I look forward to working with you in the next few months.
And we're very much looking forward to working with you, and thank you, Kevin. So it's 12:17. I suggest I give you the relative luxury of a break until 12:30, where board members need to reconvene because we have two items, sensitive, confidential items that need to be held and happened, discussed in a private session. So if you'd like to take your ease for the next 10 minutes or so, and I think you have a link to dial back into that call. And for those who won't be joining us on that call, thank you once again for being with us today. Take care.